The source of power of the Hulk is his overwhelming anger. And its most surprising secret is that he is always angry. So I'm going to create a deck that is always angry, because it hates the current meta. A lot. The most fundamental combination of cards that I wanted to play is Land Tax and Winds of Change. Land Tax is a very powerful card that can provide tons of card advantage, and it introduces in the game a very curious state of mind, when suddenly both players have to take the number of lands into consideration. Unfortunately, it doesn't see much play in old school, because the cards you get are always basic lands, and therefore not so impactful by itself. Although there are nice consequences of activating it. For example, it reduces the number of lands in your deck, which increases the chances to draw actual spells afterwards. It also lets you pick any combination of up to 3 basic lands, which can ease finding the right colors. The big issue here is if you cannot activate it because your opponent is working actively against it. Winds of Change is a curious card that allows us to reset our hand. The funniest thing is that it forces your opponent to do the same. We lose 1 card in the process though. That's bad. But what if we were able to have so many cards in our hand that the -1 card cost wouldn't matter? Land Tax is already being used in the White Winnie and the Tax Edge decks. Winds of Change is being used in the Underworld Winds deck. But where are they being used together? In the brand new Boros Taxes deck. When I realized about this combo, I immediately recognized how strong it could be as a mid-game card advantage engine. So I thought, alright, let's build a deck with Land Tax and Winds of Change. This combo could actually benefit the White Winnie deck. So let's pick a White Winnie deck archetype to begin with. But then it suddenly came to me. Hate. I enjoy playing other formats besides old school, like Legacy and Pauper, so I immediately made the connection. Death and Taxes. Death and Taxes is a Legacy deck that hates a lot. It hates everything except for creatures, and its lands hate the opponent's lands, especially if they are non-basic ones. It also hates legendary creatures, but that's a completely different story. The most important thing is that it uses its own creatures to present tokens of hate. And the more of them you have, the less your opponents can actually play. So now you know that Boros Taxes is an attempt to introduce Death and Taxes in old school. I have the personal theory that the metagame in Legacy can only be considered healthy if Death and Taxes is in the top 4 strongest decks. So the reason why I picked this archetype is to brute force a healthy meta in old school. Or to cleanse it, if you will, from everything that it's hated. Oh my god. There are so many bad connotations that Boros Taxes could be associated with, that it's going to be difficult to dodge them. Cleanse the meta from Djinns. Cleanse the meta from Ifrits. Cleanse the meta from Black Dark creatures. Cleanse the meta from non-basic lands. Play in many lands, and play in cards with very high mana costs. Cleanse the meta. Cleanse the meta. Yeah, so that's basically it. Boros Taxes is an archetype that hates the meta. It's an anti-meta deck. In order to build the most hating Boros Taxes deck in history, we have to determine which aspects of the meta to hate, and laser focus on them with no mercy. The first token of hate that we will gladly offer to our opponents happens when they use some of the usual suspects. This deck should be able to destroy them on sight, and punish the opponent from only picking creatures from this list. We can observe that there are plenty of Djinns, Ifrits and black creatures in this list. Therefore, Boros Taxes hatred will be aiming at particularly those. The second token of hate that we will be so delighted to hand our opponents happens when they use many non-basic lands. It is already a bit demotivating to see the usual playset of Mishra's Factories, the one Library of Alexandria and the one Strip Mine included in every deck list, regardless of the archetype. Also, players tend to splash blue just to include the 3 blue power cards, at practically no deck building costs thanks to the dual lands. So, Boros Taxes will love that you use all of those non-basic lands, because it will tax you for it. The third final token of hate will be delivered when our opponent is playing a deck that is very mana hungry, aka plays many spells that have a very high converted mana cost, or expensive permanent activation costs, in which the consequence of these decks is to have as many lands as possible. Having 6 lands is good, having 15 is great, and they will use all of them every turn. Nope, if Boros Taxes is in the meta, you won't. The worst thing that could happen after hating something so much would be to include that source of hate in our own deck. It would make the mirror match so uninteresting. So the things that we need to avoid at all costs while designing this deck are: number 1, using the hated usual suspects; number 2, using non-basic lands; and number 3, having the need to use many lands every turn. Avoiding the hated usual suspects is very easy. No Ifrit or Jinn is white, and there are no multicolored black and white creatures that we could play in this deck, since it's a white and red deck. Avoiding using non-basic lands is easy, since as red cards we will only have Winds of Change and Blood Moon. Also, many white cards impose a double white or triple white cost, so sticking to white implies the use of many planes in the deck. So moving towards the idea of using almost all planes, it's kind of intuitive. Finally, avoiding the use of more than 3 lands per turn is going to be the hardest part. But if building this deck wouldn't present a big challenge, then where's the fun? Curious to see the first draft? Let's go! Having in mind everything explained earlier, let's have a look at the first draft of the Boros Taxes deck. By the way, all the cards that you are going to see are proxies. Since the deck is in beta testing, I thought it would be fitting to just use beta proxies for it. You know, beta testing, beta proxies. So of course the deck begins with 4 land tags and 3 Winds of Change. This is the core of the deck and one of the keys of its strength during the mid-game. As protection, we add the usual white package containing 4 Disenchant and 4 Swords to Plowshares. We have 2 extra Divine Offering to further destroy the opponent's mana development dependent on artifacts, and also to have more ways to destroy those annoying blocked Misres factories. Together with these removals, we add the one must-include Chaos Orb. This so far doesn't make the deck so special compared to others. Just wait for it, you're going to love it. Here comes the hate. 2 main deck Blood Moon. Why? Because it really punishes the use of non-basic lands. And since we ourselves don't use them so much, the least we can do to not be immediately behind in our game 1 is to at least disable opposing Misres factories and Libraries of Alexandria. I have been playing Izzet Control with 2 Blood Moons main deck for a while, and I must say it really is strong. The general upside of having them will balance the misfortunes of throwing them versus decks like Mono Black, for instance. Then comes the next token of hatred, the hatred for having the need of using many lands every turn. To cover that, we include 2 Winter Orb main. In order to fly a bit under the radar, we add 1 Mox Pearl, 1 Mox Ruby, and 1 Sol Ring. They also help us accelerate the curve a bit. But the most devastating piece of synergy is the inclusion of 3 Relic Barriers. Not only can they deactivate our Winter Orbs whenever we need to untap all our lands at once, but they can also tap opposing Misres factories during combat, and take away artifact mana from our opponents during their upkeep. Have you ever seen a tapped and unused Black Lotus anytime? Well, get ready for it, I'm sure it's going to be fun. We already have so much hatred in the main deck, but there is still one token of hate missing, the usual suspect's allergy. And this, we won't do it with spells, we will do it with other creatures. The job of these creatures is mainly to be the tiny aggressors that will eventually kill our opponent. But for some of them, if they spot a usual suspect, they will become merciless. The list of creatures is the following: 4 Savannah Lions. Usual suspect, I know, but it's the lowest ranked one. So if the usual suspects were 12 and not 13, maybe. Regardless, a 2/1 for 1 white is an excellent aggressor for a deck with a ceiling for converted mana cost of 3. 2 white knights, a solid body with first strike that annoys the abyss, and mono black. 4 King Suleiman, here it is. Here is the first piece of pure hatred in this deck. For just 2 mana, all your Ifrits and Jinns are dead bodies. Screw ripples. 2 Exorcist. Another addition hate in black, its best targets being Jusum Jinn and Hypnotic Spectre. And 4 Preacher. Well, this is not a particular hate per se, but I guarantee that the highest percentage of creatures it will steal will be usual suspects. The rest are the 16 lands, 11 of them basic plains, 1 mountain to be able to find it with the land tax in case we need it red urgently, and 4 plateau. Oh, wait a second, you wanted to stay away from non-basic lands? Yes, but we will attack non-basic lands with Blood Moon. So when it's active, our plateaus are mountains, which is totally fine. And until then, they can provide us with the precious white mana that we required for casting almost every other card in the deck. So this is the list for the main deck. Let's have a look at the sideboard. The sideboard is not even completed yet. There are still some things that I would like to test before crystallizing a proper sideboard list. But what I'm certain of is that the sideboard will include for sure 2 Blood Moon and 2 Winter Orb to complete the 4 for optimal hate dip sauce. The sideboard could also include another 2 extra Divine Offering to hate mana artifacts even more. The rest could be more Exorcists, some Spirit Links, and perhaps some Crusades or Jihads. And besides that, I have no other card that comes to the top of my mind. Maybe you can help me with this, so hey, write me in the comments below if you have any good ideas. So there's that. This is the first decklist draft for Boros Taxes. What do you think about the idea? Is it too much hate? Is it too little? I'm going to start testing it right now. I'll tell you how well it works in the next draft video. And even if it's crap, the most important thing is to try to create a new strong deck. Remember our motto, screw ripples.